Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. It has generally been accepted that the temple endowment ceremony was given in the early 1840s when Joseph Smith attended some Masonic ceremonies and adapted them for Mormon church purposes. In our next conversation with historian Don Bradley, we'll find out that there may have been some of that information in the lost pages of the Book of Mormon. What other things can we learn about these Masonic elements and the endowment in the lost pages? You won't want to miss this episode. Check out our conversation with Don Bradley. Also, I just want to mention that Mormon News Report is one of the coolest podcasts out there. So they cover weekly Mormon news with a healthy dose of snark and commentary. Join Brant and Jenny every Monday to get caught up on all the top stories, and you need to stay up on the top stories in Mormon news. So Brant and Jenny are awesome friends, and check out their podcast. It's great. Now back to our conversation.
This Fayette Latham guy, he's not just confabulating this. He's remembering what Joseph Sr. told him. And the narrative that he gives has everything to do with temple. It's Nauvoo endowment stuff. And the thing is, Latham was never a Mormon, was never a Latter-day Saint. He wouldn't have gone through the temple. At this time, neither would Joseph Sr. Joseph Sr. never goes through the Nauvoo temple. He dies before the endowment is instituted. So why is there Nauvoo endowment material in this lost pages Book of Mormon narrative translated in 1828? And Joseph Smith doesn't become a Freemason until 1842. That's 14 years later. I had been absolutely convinced that Joseph didn't know anything about the Nauvoo endowment until he becomes a Freemason in March 1842. I thought, Freemason, mid-March 1842, early May, like 5 weeks later, endowment. Just sort of connect the dots. Sure, that's causation, right? This is what I was thinking, right? And I'm not saying they're unrelated, but Joseph has much of the structure and content of the Nauvoo endowment in his mind as he's bringing forth the Book of Mormon in 1828, because so much of it's already there. In my mind, this was interweaving with the different narratives about the first vision that I had, different pieces of evidence about what was in it. I was looking at parallel narratives in Latter-day Saint scripture. How do other people, Abraham, Enoch, Moses, how do they become seers? Brother of Jared is the big one, okay? So Brother of Jared, I'd never read this narrative this way. We don't read it this way, but think about this. Ether 3, I just told the narrative from Joseph Smith Sr. about how the Nephites got the interpreters. How did the Jaredites get the interpreters? Ether 3 says, Brother of Jared, whose name, by the way, is withheld from us, right? It's secret. It's esoteric. There's sort of like an idea of secret, sacred name.
Mahanrai Moriankumer.
Well, later that's revealed, but it's deliberately withheld, right? So we call this guy the Brother of Jared, in the narrative. Brother of Jared goes up on a mountaintop while he's on an exodus, kind of like Sinai, right? On that mountaintop, and Joseph Smith in Nauvoo says, anciently, mountaintops were temples. When God's people didn't have the means to build a temple, like in the days of Moses in the Exodus, he says, God accepted mountaintops as the place to give people keys, to give the endowment. Joseph says this explicitly in a Nauvoo sermon, and I quote the exact sermon in my book, in chapter 14 about Mosiah the First. So, the Brother of Jared is on a mountaintop. That should cue temple, right? He talks with the Lord through the veil. Now, he doesn't mean a cloth veil, of course, like in the temple. It means the veil that cloth veil represents, right? But he has a dialogue with the Lord through what it calls the veil. I don't know. That sounds kind of familiar to me, He has a dialogue with him through the veil. And as part of this dialogue, the Lord asks the Brother of Jared a question. And what is the question about? It's a question about the Lord's hand. The Lord, Christ, here, has put his hand through the veil. Brother of Jared sees part of his hand. And the Lord asks him, what is that you saw? Question about his hand. Dialogue through the veil, temple context, dialogue through the veil, question about hand. the Lord asks him a whole series of questions, like a catechism here, right? And those questions are to test his faith and knowledge of spiritual things. Once he passes the test, the Lord admits him into his presence and says, I'm bringing you into my presence. You're redeemed from the fall. Okay, now cue the story of Adam and Eve and the fall, right? This story of humankind going full circle. We fall from God's presence. This man individually is restored to God's presence, full circle, right? He's then given an esoteric revelation of truth, spiritual truth, like vision from the beginning to the end, things he can't reveal to other people. He seals that up. That's the sealed portion. That's where the idea of the sealed portion comes from. It's in this narrative. He also gives him these white stones, okay? Touches these one set of stones, hands him apparently, or something, gives him these other two stones. They're white stones. White stones, Joseph Smith talks about this in section 130 of the Doctrine and Covenants, where the idea of a white stone is coming from. It's from Revelation 2:17, where Christ says, to him that overcometh, I will give a white stone, in the which is written a new name, which no man knoweth, save him that receiveth it. So the idea of receiving a white stone, Christ giving you a white stone, in the scriptures is presented in association with the idea of an esoteric, a secret new name. So we have that theme, familiar theme, in this story as well. Like, you add all this up, and it just like screams Nauvoo Endowment. And that's being translated in 1829. And it's parallel to the story Joseph Smith Sr. gives. That's the story of the Jaredites getting the interpreters. Then Joseph Sr. gives the story of the Nephites getting the interpreters in the Lost Pages. And it's kind of like the opposite end of the other story. Dialogue through the veil in a temple setting. The Lord asks questions, starting with a question about the man's hand in this case. The man veils his face. He's able to see spiritual things. There's further information from Martin Harris suggesting that at this point, this man, Mosiah, sees the Lord. He's standing in the Lord's presence, and he's looking in the interpreters. He sees the Lord. And so just like the brother of Jared. And so, and there are other things that fit together here, right? If you trace the biblical connection, intertextuality there, and so on. So what I was seeing, and then this in complex ways interweaves with Joseph Smith's first vision and the associated finding of his white stone, his first seer stone.
The first one was white, not brown. There's a
whole account of this that Joseph gave at his 1826 hearing when he's being called up before the law for being a glass looker. Joseph tells the court, well, I looked in somebody else's seer stone, Sally Chase's, and I saw this light that was glowing, and it glowed brighter and brighter till it was bright as the noonday sun. Sounds a whole lot like the first vision, right? And it was off at the shores of Lake Erie, 150 miles away. My parents eventually let me go out and get it. I dug under the roots of this tree all night, found the thing, brought it up, washed it off, put it in my hat, looked in it, and he could see anything. Time and space were obliterated. He could see all things. It's like the interpreters. It's just this white stone. In the account, Joseph said he had acquired one of the attributes of deity, an all-seeing eye. One thing, all-seeing eye, very Masonic, very temple. And we got it on the Salt Lake Temple, right? These are temple themes.
It's on our dollar bills too, right?
This all, yeah. This all came together in my mind, all these different strands into a kind of gestalt and more, okay? All different things about the first vision where I'm seeing, oh my gosh, it's Joseph Smith's initiation as a seer, and it already is portending the endowment. He's like 14, maybe 15, according to his earliest account, years old. And he's already got, through his vision, much of the structure of the endowment in his head. A few years later, He translates the lost pages, then he translates our extant Book of Mormon text, Brother Jared. And again, it's just loaded with temple. Latter-day Saints often go to the temple, and they're understandably kind of freaked out when they first go. And for some people, they never get over this, right? But it's because temple endowment is so different from church. We don't do anything like all this symbolic ritual stuff in church, and then we go into the temple and it's all over. People go into the temple, they're like, I've never seen anything like this before. This isn't part of my religion, is it? This is too weird. Funny thing is, if we read the Brother of Jared story closely, oh yeah, this is part of your religion. It always has been, ever since you first read the Book of Mormon. Like, once you know how to see it, it's there. I think we need to, teach it, right? Call this out. So when people go to the temple, they're not just, shocked, right?
Right.
It's there. So getting back to what you were asking about, because I went on to that, because this all weaves together, and it's been an important part of my spiritual journey. This is what I was working on when I decided to come back to the church, or really when I realized I was coming back to the church. There are so many implications and dimensions of this. I cannot tell you how much my mind was blown, right? 14, 15-year-old boy is not thinking, you know what, someday I'm going to start a church, and then lots of years later, when I'm 36, I'm going to institute a new ritual in a temple setting where I'm going to include all of these elements of this vision that I'm making up now. There are ways that this plays out that it wouldn't have played out if Joseph Smith is insincere. There's more going on, and thus obviously that would involve, to really nail all this down, right, would require much more extended discussion or really published papers. I presented on it. I'm going to be publishing on it next year for bicentennial of the First Vision. But that would be 2020, since we're recording this in December 2019.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with historian Don Bradley. In our next conversation, I was surprised to learn that there were Masonic tools found with the golden plates.
Joseph Sr. tells this guy about the plates, and he tells him that on the top plate, there were the implements of masonry, as used by Masons of the present day. So I found this really interesting. Wow, Masonic stuff way back at the beginning of Mormonism. Hey.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please support Gospel Tangents and become a subscriber. For just $5 a month, go to patreon.com/gospeltangents and you can hear the entire interview. And you can also get transcripts available at either our Amazon website, or if you want to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website at gospeltangents.com and you can click the yellow subscribe button. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And don't forget to click here to subscribe on YouTube, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again for listening.